Hello everyone and welcome back to the Topical Hour. Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy came out in 2021, and I bet a couple of you didn't even know that. This is another game that was definitely a commercial failure, even though it was pretty recent. Obviously, one of the more recent Marvel games was the Avengers game, and that game deserved to fail on just about every level. However, I am here to talk about this game. Does it deserve the failure it got? Absolutely not. This game is fantastic in just about every way and a huge upgrade compared to the former. It's honestly a bit of a tragedy that this game was slept on so hard, and unfortunately I'm a part of this as well. I barely gave the game's trailer a second look because I was put off by the fact that you'd only be playing as one character, Star-Lord. I'll explain why later, but that's actually not really an issue at all in this game. Also, from this point forward, a spoiler warning is in place. I know more than half of you haven't played this game, let's be real. Also, right before we start, I'll remind you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Just pop down and take 2 seconds to do that. Alright, here we go. So, let's start with the story. If I had to sum this game's story up in one sentence, I'd say it's pretty good, but it shouldn't be. This game's story starts off strong, seeing as it's not another origin story. God knows we have enough of those. But interestingly, it does start early into the Guardians' story. I mean, most of the galaxy they claim to protect hasn't even heard of them, and routinely mischaracterizes them as the gardeners of the galaxy, which is awesome, by the way. I could definitely see that being an MCU joke. It's a lot like the Batman, where these characters have been together for a while, but not long enough that they're absolutely comfortable with each other. They all fought in the Galactic War, and were seemingly all in a prison at least once. In fact, the Galactic War this game talks about feels kind of like how the MCU refers to Endgame as something huge that happened, and you can feel the effects it had on the characters. It's great world building. So anyway, the Guardians are basically a business startup with barely any money, so they're flying around the galaxy doing jobs for people to stay up and running. That is until the Universal Church of Truth comes along and decimates the Nova Corps. The Nova Corps in this video will be referred to as the Space Constables. The Space Constables are fine, I guess. I like them more when they have Nova Prime running around, but they're still fine here. So, the Church of Truth kills a Space Constable and kidnaps their daughter. The reason the Guardians even get involved is because there's questioning as to whether or not Star-Lord is the father of Nikki, the kidnapped girl. But lo and behold, we discover that the Church abducted her so that she would become the matriarch, or their queen. They brainwash as many people as they can across the galaxy so they'll put their faith into her, which turns into something called faith energy. I don't know either. So, because the Church of Truth is brainwashing entire planets, they build up a fleet of ships and brainwash millions of soldiers in a super short amount of time. So basically almost everyone but the Guardians are the bad guys, and they also have unlimited resources. And we have like 2 days to figure this out. It's definitely cool to have the entire galaxy turned on the Guardians. It lends to them feeling like the ragtag group they are somehow solving the problem. But it's also entirely feasible that they lose to such a vast threat. But there's a problem with this that I'll address soon, so for now, let's dive into the characters. Star-Lord's story is pretty good. It's worth mentioning that I like this version of the Guardians of the Galaxy more than the one from the movies, so keep that in mind. But this version of Star-Lord is much better than his cinematic counterpart. His origin story is a lot better to start. You can tell that the death of his mother weighs heavily on his heart. The flashbacks convey this excellently by not taking too long and not being prevalent throughout the entire story, just being in the first half. His mother's death is also more tragic than just cancer. This time she's killed by Chitauri, which leads to Peter's resentment of the race in an organic way. Peter was also a prisoner during the Galactic War, along with being a space pirate for a while, so he has a colorful past, but he's not unbelievably heroic because he's from Earth. He's grounded, but still has elements of the space whimsy that everyone else has too. As for his design, I think it's actually really good. I like that he tries to keep his hair up as a way to keep in touch with his past. I like the little bit of extra armor you can see he has strapped to his pink jacket. I really like his jet boots, and I even like his new mask, which looks like it could probably take a space bullet to the head. And even his voice actor is doing a much better job than Chris Pratt ever did in those movies, so that's a big plus for him. And now I'll put the rest of the Guardians in a section together. All of their designs are fantastic. Groot's is suitably different enough from his movie counterpart. Rocket's is... actually, his is kind of boring. He has goggles, that's about it. I like the white of Gamora's suit. It goes with the green of her skin and the red of her hair nicely. I actually really like Drax's new design. It's much more comic accurate and satisfyingly plain. It's just shorts over pants, that's it. As for their arcs, I like Rocket's about belonging on a team of heroes even though everyone, including Drax towards the beginning, calls him an abomination. Gamora's arc is more about the being a hero part, as everyone, including Drax towards the beginning again, calls her a traitor, and the most deadly woman in the galaxy. She doesn't even seem to believe that she deserves to be alive and is suicidal before the game takes place. I also really like that Peter and Gamora don't get romantically involved. There'd be no way to do it without forcing it, so I'm glad nobody tried. Otherwise, I like the arcs of Rocket and Gamora. They're done in a slow, more organic way. It's also really nice that you can tell Gamora hates when children are brainwashed because she was as well. I guess nobody likes when children are brainwashed, but still. The way she personally tries to go after the Grand Unifier, who I'll talk about soon, is really cool and lends to why she feels so strongly about being the brainwashed matriarch. Now, the most important arc of the game, Groot's. Groot is probably the most deep character of the game, seeing as Drax is also done incredibly well. The way he speaks of his family and the way their deaths are pointless, he seems more bothered by the fact that they died without meaning than the fact that they died, and it lends to him caring about honor. I also like the way he's actually initially brainwashed. I didn't mention this before, but the only reason the brainwashing works is because it preys on wanting to bring the dead back. That's why Nikki was persuaded into being the matriarch, because her mother was just killed. So Drax being convinced to turn on his own team towards the middle of the game because of his family, that's actually incredibly smart. I also like how long it takes to convince him otherwise, like we have to go on a few missions before he's back to normal. As for the other side characters, they're all fine. The most important is probably Nikki. She straddles the line of annoying child to sympathetic character a little bit too hard. I like how much Star-Lord relates to her and that she's probably the hardest to convince to turn away from the faith, but if there's ever a sequel to this game, I hope she's not in it. I mean it. Do not bring her back, her story is over. The best is Cosmo the dog, who's a Soviet dog with telepathic powers. He's funny but not a comic relief, and he feels cool. I don't know how to explain it, but it makes the universe of this game cooler to have Cosmo the dog in it. As for Lady Hellbender, she's basically a zookeeper, but I do like that she comes back at the end to help the Guardians. I also like that she values honor like Drax does, but it's annoying how little she values people over animals. Like, she'll sometimes kill people for no reason just because. And the last good side character is Adam Warlock. Actually, good is a stretch. He's pretty bland and doesn't have much personality, but he's also basically a god, so it doesn't really bug me. He's a bit of a MacGuffin, but it's cool that he literally turns into the boss at the end. I like that. As for the last side character, Mantis, I genuinely hate her. It's hard to describe why, but I really don't like when characters explain how lucky we are to be in a universe where we win, and that's all her character is around for. She talks in a way that sounds written to be confusing rather than actually being confusing. Her design is boring, and there's nothing she says or does that isn't annoying. The issues I have with Mantis are probably biased, but I don't care. Just stop talking about other timelines. Please. Please. Please! As for the main villains, it's really the leader of the church, which is Grand Unifier Raker, and the Magus. I didn't mention this earlier, but the reason we have to stop everyone from being faithful is because it will allow a creature called the Magus to consume the universe. Kind of like Ego, but a more primal consumption. The Magus came from the Mind Stone. It's basically the balance between the infinite power of the stone and the infinite hunger of the creature. It's kinda cool. As for Raker, I love everything about his character. He's surprisingly tolerant of the nonsense of the Guardians. He resorts to killing last, which is more than I can say for most of the characters in the game, and you can tell he's really just trying to bring back his son and will often make up excuses for his actions. It's like when someone tries to pretend that their dad is coming back from buying milk, and it's kinda sad to just watch him work so hard when you know it's not going to happen. And the most interesting part of his character is that he dies thinking that he won and thinking that he got his son back. He doesn't even know he lost. Take notes, Avengers. What was interesting about your villain? The fact that his head is the size of a small boat? Get him out of here. For a linear story, it doesn't feel like the game is forcing you through a tight series of events. Especially seeing as you make choices throughout the story that can impact later events, sometimes changing levels in the game. It's a great way to make you feel connected to the team. It's also worth mentioning that the voice actors in this game are not only giving absolutely phenomenal performances, but they probably have the most voice lines per character that I have ever seen in a game without traditional dialogue trees. Obviously there are dialogue trees in this game, but they're not everywhere. I'm mainly talking about the combat dialogue specifically. There are different voice lines for every single combat encounter in this game, along with a ton of lines for the huddle-ups, which I'll get to later. That's impressive not only on the voice actors' part, but also on the studios. They had the patience to just record thousands of lines of dialogue for a game that was probably already assumed to underperform. That's great, truly. It reminds me of my own videos. And now, the gameplay. The gameplay is definitely a little bit vanilla and a bit plain. Now remember when I said earlier that playing as Star-Lord wasn't really a problem? Well, I wasn't lying. As you progress through the game, you unlock skill points. Now yeah, you can get all the abilities for Star-Lord, but you can also unlock new attacks for your team. Rocket specializes in explosives, Groot specializes at least mostly in more passive attacks, Gamora usually does super high damage, and Drax usually does super high stun damage. It's really cool how they implemented the team-based combat in a smooth and satisfying way. I also like how the game slows down a bit just to give you a minute to think. I mean, you get to choose from 15 attacks when you go into Guardians mode, so I like that you get a moment to choose. All of the attacks are at least pretty good, and I really like that throughout the story, when a character goes through their most important story moment, they unlock their ultimate ability. Gamora unlocks an extremely high sword damage attack on a single enemy. I like the ability, although it's kind of similar to all her other abilities, so it's kind of boring. Rocket unloads a comical amount of weapons into a single enemy in a high damage attack. But Drax's ability is just going insane and dealing a ton of stun damage to a single enemy, but also a bunch to everyone else. Again, it just feels too similar to his other attacks to hold real significance, but it's still cool. You can either manually activate it to revive a teammate, or it will automatically activate when you die to revive you. But you can only use it once per fight, which is the perfect amount of safety net in my opinion. As for Star-Lord, I actually like all of the gameplay of the character, to a certain degree. The element parts of the elemental guns are just fine. You get ice to make enemies frozen and brittle, you get fire or lava, which literally burns your enemies alive and they take a bit of damage over time when they're hit with it. You get wind, which can pull enemies towards you to up your damage against them, and you also get lightning, which doesn't damage enemies as much as the others, but it does chain to other enemies. The elements are awesome visually, but imagine if you were Star-Lord. You fight in the biggest, most lethal galactic war of all time and your weapons don't really do anything for you, but the second some people who you barely even like might die, now your weapons decide to change seasons. Star-Lord has 4 core abilities that are all useful. One is overloading the jet boots to fly around your enemies, one is just unloading the elemental guns in a high damage attack, one is a high stun attack that lobs grenades in a circle all around you, which is actually pretty cinematic, albeit a little bit weak for such a cool looking attack. His ultimate attack is literally just an impenetrable shield, which is something that I really like. It's cool to have something so overpowered for a character whose other abilities are actually pretty weak. I think his other abilities are weak to place emphasis on the other characters, which is cool, but also a bit annoying at times. Like everything I just described for the last minute or so is everything you get for combat. It's too simple. So, I'm going to do a little bit of a rewrite on the combat. The elemental attacks are first and the easiest to fix. Just give each of them an overchargeable ability. For ice, make it so that if you shoot any enemy enough, they can slow to 50% of their speed until they die. Meaning attacks and movement, of course. As for fire, make it so that the enemy explodes if you discharge enough ammo into them, but have the explosion do a bunch of damage to who you're shooting at and half that damage to anyone close by. Don't make it an instant death or it becomes too overpowered, and it should consume like all of the elemental charge. As for wind, just make a charge shot that puts a tornado onto the battlefield that pulls all enemies to that spot, albeit not too fast. And for lightning, I don't know, just have a charge shot that uses all elemental charge to electrify a huge portion of the floor on the battlefield. That should work. And these abilities should be unlockable by killing enemies with their base elements. I think that's good. As for the other skill abilities, just prolong the jet boot overload as long as you can cancel it somehow, and up the damage of the elemental overload and the bomb abilities. You would unlock these upgrades by proceeding through the story. Maybe towards the halfway point you get upgrades from Cosmo the dog to help you on your mission to stop the Church of Truth. Yeah, I think that fixes the combat quite a bit. If those changes were implemented, I think it'd make the game slightly better. Oh, and a feature that's pretty cool and unique is the huddle up idea. If you charge it up, you can just stop whatever fight you're in, no matter how difficult or close you are to losing, and come together with your team. They'll say something that depends on how the fight is going. If you're winning, then they'll boast, but if you're losing, everyone's gonna say that they think that it's too difficult to make it out alive. You get a dialogue tree, and if you pick the wrong thing to say, like a rousing speech when your team is already winning, then you get a shield and music while you fight, which is cool. But if you get it right, everyone on the team is revived and gets a boost, along with your shield and music. It's a fantastic system that adds personality to the game, and I've yet to run into a dialogue tree that I've heard before, so that's pretty awesome. As for the boss fight of the game, it's pretty good, but I wish Grand Unifier Raker would do an attack every once in a while that leaves him vulnerable to a randomized elemental attack, weakening him to more damage. And yes, I do count Raker as the final boss, even if the Magus is technically the final fight. And Magus's fight is also pretty good, seeing as it literally interrupts the credits with a surprise ending. That was pretty epic. As for this game as a failure, I think the main reason is Avengers' failure, which I will be discussing on this channel pretty soon. That game was pretty much an abomination to most, and it left a bad taste in our mouth. So I can see not wanting to purchase this game. But this game does just about everything differently. You play as one character, it's single player, it's offline, it's linear, the story and main characters are a million times better, and the gameplay is also a million times better. This game gets an easy 9.5 out of 10. I think the only points that are docked come from the combat being slightly dull at times. And Mantis. That's all that's wrong with this game, and it's more of a small issue than a fundamental flaw. I really like this game personally, and I think if you buy it, you won't be disappointed. Even though I just went through the entire thing. Anyway guys, as always, this video took me a long time to make, so if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel, that'd give me a nice, nasal, powdery, white dopamine boost. Or not, that's fine. Play nice, people.